Welcome, Nicole, to the podcast. I am so happy that you reluctantly decided to do this.
Thank you. I'm excited. And, it's my first podcast. So you're taking my podcast virginity.
Ooh, this is a very special moment. I would pop a bottle, but I have my green smoothie here instead, trying to take care of myself as a mother.
Yeah.
We connected in a very interesting way, celebrating our mutual friend's birthday. We did some embodiment practices. It was a beautiful day, and that's the one thing that we're going to be able to talk about today because we were able to connect to our inner sensuality, our inner goddess, our inner feminine nature. And that's one of the topics that I want to get to. In the intro, I described to everyone that you were a labor and delivery nurse, a doula, and a birth educator, and a tantric intimacy coach.
It
I
makes
want to
perfect
hear
sense, right?
it totally does. I want to hear that journey. Please, please grace us with that journey.
Ooh, where to start? It has been a journey. I think that's a great word for it, and something that I feel very lucky that my career has allowed that growth. And so I did start out as a registered nurse in labor and delivery, and maternal infant health is my background. I love everything about that field, and I just consumed knowledge at that age and stage like mind candy and learned everything I could from that really science background. And I love that field. So I work in that field. I teach nursing students. It's been a lot of growth through that background of science, and then my curiosity kind of kicked in. I worked in that field for probably almost a decade before I was like, there's more to this. There's more to this that I'm curious about. I had my own children during that time, and I realized I wanted something that looked a little different than what I saw as kind of mainstream, what everyone knows and expects, what we see in the movies and we see in TV. That really started my journey toward becoming a childbirth educator. I did some more training in that. I took my own childbirth ed classes, and had two beautiful daughters and two very different birth experiences. So I think I had a good range of experience, we'll put it that way. And then I decided I'd like to do more of that supportive piece. I was already into things like yoga and embodiment, and I've been facilitating women's circles and hearing from women and from people having babies has been my life. I'm that person that people call. I feel so lucky. I'm usually the first person people call when they find out they're pregnant. And it really inspired me to look at at it more holistically. I'll stop there, but that was kind of the piece where I saw we have this, and this is amazing, and this is the system I work in, and I respect it and I love it. And I have questions.
You were curious.
Yeah.
And I love that. I'd love to know what it is a system that you worked in and respected and loved the science and loved learning about it. I'd love to know what were the things you saw that were quite routine that might have led to that curiosity that you're like, maybe there's more.
It wasn't so much the piece around seeing the routine. It was more the piece around when I experienced going through my own pregnancies and births. I felt like, wow, I have inside knowledge into how this all works. So I'm coming at this from a really informed place, and navigating that was still so challenging. And I thought to myself, we're basically asking people to plan like an exotic vacation somewhere they've never been and make it this trip of a lifetime that works out the quote unquote way you want it to go. And it's like you have someone that's going to help you plan it. Maybe my partner's going to come with me. Cool. Well, have they ever been to the exotic place that you're going to visit? No. right? So I feel like it was that piece around we set ourselves up for this experience that has so much impact on our life, on our parenting, on our trajectory of what that looks like after. And we do less prep and have less experience than we could possibly have because we haven't been there before, right?
Mm.
That was the piece where I stepped into more of the doula work, like doula as that guiding piece. For me, it's the piece around kind of like being the tour guide. I've been here before. I can explain things to you. I can help you ask the right questions. I can make everything around us smoother so that you can have an experience that is fulfilling and that is as close to what you'd hoped for on this trip, right, as possible. And if things aren't going the way we planned, I can show you the options. We can
Mm.
explain those pieces. And that relationship, I just think is so, so important because we have amazing nurses and midwives and obstetricians that are going to guide us as well. And having someone that you have an established relationship with, that you feel a little more comfortable, like someone steps out of the room and you're like, okay, now, Nicole, I want to ask you this,
Mm.
because I
Mhm.
know you, because we have that relationship. That piece was such a game changer for me between baby number one, who I brought my partner, we were so prepared. I had a wonderful team, and baby number two, where I had some established relationships with people who came with us on that journey. So that to me is like the best of all the worlds. No matter what you're choosing, to have a trusted, supportive person there, I think just makes such a difference.
I agree. I love that analogy that you used of being the tour guide for a couple that's never been to this exotic place. And exactly, we're just sort of expected to know everything or to just navigate everything without any prior experience or knowledge of actually how to cope with certain things that might be unexpected or things that go in a different direction than we wanted or desired. And so I love that analogy of being the tour guide for this amazing once or twice or three times in a lifetime trip, right? Going back to labor and delivery, did you ever come across any kind of things that you were like, oh, I know that's our policy. I know that that's routine. I get it. I know why, but it doesn't really seem to serve the couple. It doesn't really seem to serve the mother, or it doesn't really seem to serve the baby from what you understand when you had more experience as a doula.
I mean, I think when we look at a system that is so supportive in many, many ways and so taxed in many, many ways,
Mhm.
it's not that there were practices necessarily that I was like, oh, this isn't good for anyone. It was more like, this is how it goes because this is what we do. And you can totally ask for something different. Labor and delivery nurses, I've got to tell you, are like, in my experience, pretty open to what is it that you're hoping for? But you have to ask. And that's that place where it's like, if you don't feel like you have much of a voice and of course, you're scared. It's a new environment. You're going through something that is new. So you do have to ask. Otherwise, it's like, yeah, this is how this goes here. Um, and it's that piece around, okay, if we have a different vision of what we'd like, or if we have an idea, or I've heard about this or that, are we empowered to ask for it? Do we have the knowledge even to know what we want? Have we spent as much time looking at what kind of birth experience would be fulfilling as we have picking a stroller and a crib and getting the baby's room ready? And a lot of the time, the answer is no to that. So we kind of get swept along. And I think that's that, or they get there showing up, right, in labor. So we can have those kind of conversations and go, what is it that you're hoping for? How can we support that? And for the most part, I see people being very supportive of all of that, but people just not necessarily knowing what they want and then later going, hey, that's not what I wanted. Yeah, absolutely. It's a dance between the system we're in, the comfort we have in asking for what we're hoping for, and then that time spent looking at what is it that I'd like? What is it that I've seen? What are my fears? What are my desires? Spending time in that space in order to get prepared.
I think that's where the important work of the doula, like the emotional support person, comes in. Like, do I even know what questions to ask? Do I even know what my options are if I want to pick certain options? And so, doing all of that work before the experience, before this extravagant, exotic trip is planned, right? That's all the prep work that can make a huge difference for couples. I'm curious, as a doula, were you mostly in hospitals or did you do any home births as well?
I was really lucky. I did births, attended births at hospitals all over the GTA, and lots of home births and some birth center births. So I've had a nice variety of births in different locations with different providers,
Mm,
and lots of different families.
I love that. Did you see any main differences just based on location and environment?
I think that every place, if we're going to use the exotic trip analogy, has its own culture,
Mm,
right? And you can see that culture based on the different places that you are, teams that you have, choices that you make. And it's a pretty privileged position to be able to choose where we give birth and what team and what location and what hospital or birth center or home, right?
mm,
I think respecting the fact that some people have that choice and can do that research and choose that culture, amazing. And then on the other hand, we have people who are going to choose based on their, their location, their proximity, that area. So, yes, different cultures around different places and teams. And again, I think that's where we can have such an impact as a doula, being that familiar face and being that constant that can accompany someone to any of the locations, right?
yeah,
And
absolutely.
and support that experience.
Mm-hmm. I love that. Yeah, and just reminding ourselves like how lucky we are to even think of like where do I want to give birth? I have all of these options. I'm going to be able to research it because not everyone has the ability or the privilege to do that, especially when it comes to different insurances and costs and all of that stuff. We deal with that a bit less in Canada, but I know in the States and other parts of the world, that's a huge motivating factor. So you're a childbirth educator. And are your classes and your gatherings and your mother's circles, your women's circles, is it mostly your doula work that's influenced it and having the science of your labor and delivery nurse work in there?
I would say, yeah, it's a blend for sure. I'm a Lamaze certified childbirth educator, and I think when people hear Lamaze, hopefully this is a myth now, but they used to just think like breathing, right? The
Mhm.
Lamaze breathing. But Lamaze really is about evidence-based practices for birth. So collecting all of the evidence for what are the safest outcomes for birthing people, for babies, and how can we infuse our childbirth education classes with practices, with information, with knowledge that is supported by evidence to say, hey, this is a good idea. These have the best outcomes. Here's all your options. And then helping people to really connect with what from this menu aligns with what you're hoping for. And I think for me, one of the really, really important pieces that I like to incorporate into my classes is that piece around, I think right now the way we kind of operate is really in our heads. There's so much information. We're bombarded with information. So we're collecting data. We're always researching. Our friends are telling us things. We're listening to podcasts. We're on the internet. So we do intellectualize that piece. And now can we also connect with the body, with what actually feels good to me, right? And I think that's that part where we want to connect with our heart, connect with our gut. And that piece, I think, is really, really key in education, not just to stay in the information overload, but really learn to connect with the body and go, what actually though is right for me? What feels good for me? And that is a learned practice for a lot of us.
Mm.
That is something that we have to slow down. We have to tune in, right? We have to connect with the body before we can hear what or feel what a yes or a no. So, yes, absolutely. My classes are all of the evidence-based and information and choices. And as I keep teaching more and more, there's more and more of that embodiment piece so
Yeah.
that we're making choices that actually feel good for us. Because I keep using the word choice, but often we're rolling with it. And rolling with it is also a practice. When we talk about birth, it's not like we get a checklist and we get to check off what we'd like, and that's how it goes. We know that. So, can we gather information so that we feel, okay, if I have to make a different choice, okay, if it's going to go this way, how am I going to cope with that? How am I going to manage that? How am I going to feel about that? And we know that people respond that they have the best birth experiences when they feel that they got to be an active participant in making choices. Not that it went the way they thought it would go, actually. Not even that it went the way they wanted it to go, but when they feel that they were actively a participant in making choices. And I think we can only actively participate in making choices if we know what is a yes or a no for us.
And so being able to connect and practice that beforehand, so you actually have that skill set going into the experience, is really important. Also, it's like birth itself, labor and birth, and even the early postpartum period is such an intuitive, embodied, it's creative, it's sexual, it is spontaneous, it's spiritual. And so having that almost like muscle memory going into that experience is going to serve people so well. And it's tricky, right? Because we often ask laboring women to go into their brain for certain things if we need to ask them something or they need to remember whatever it might be, and they have to kind of practice going back into their body, being embodied again. So it is a skill that is totally necessary. Going in your childbirth classes, what are some of the tools that you might help with to prepare or like to work that muscle memory or to prepare women going into that experience?
A lot of it is coming back to basics. People having babies are doing things that are embodied all the time, right? We go for a walk and we pay attention to what's around us. We go inward. We don't even know we're doing it sometimes. So I try to connect it with what people are already doing. If we can connect even just with things like the breath, we're all breathing already, right? Good job. We are already all doing it. Now let's tune into it, right? Now let's slow it down. Now let's actually feel what our breath feels like in our body. And as we kind of bring ourselves out of the head space through some of those really simple practices like breath work, like attention and mindfulness, some movement, you can actually see the whole room in these practices just go from here and, you know, all of a sudden the vibe changes and everything settles. Just simple practices like music, the lighting. I love to say, this is like a childbirth educator joke. We all make it. The perfect environment to birth a baby is the same environment as you made the baby, right?
Mhm.
So let's light some candles. Let's turn down the lights. Let's play some music. Let's get out some things that smell nice and do some sensual touch. All of those things are so vital. We know hormonally for people to have a baby to increase those hormones like oxytocin, the love hormone, which also contracts your uterus, and we want that to happen, right? A lot of those pieces where I tell people it's not new. We're just going to tune into these things that you already do and already know. And we're going to practice them intentionally so that it does, like you said, become that muscle memory.
I like the simplicity of it. The simpler we can make things, the better, and the easier it will be to then go there when we need to go to that space.
And I always say, if you practice something already, like yoga, meditation, guided meditation, mindfulness, listening to music, anything that gets you in that space, that space where you're not quite asleep, you're almost asleep. That's that space that we birth well in. That's that space we want to access.
Mm.
And everybody gets there in different ways. So, really focusing on what someone's already doing and then bringing it into their birth experience can be really helpful. And if someone's like, actually, no, I've never done anything like this, Nicole, this is totally new for me, then great. Like, let's play with it. Let's see what feels good in your body. Um, and let's incorporate that into what's already known into this place that we're going to go that's new. It's not a
Yeah.
time to be teaching you something new. So,
Not when you're in labor.
yeah, yeah,
Not a great time to learn a new skill.
yeah, no.
It is so much the prep ahead of time, and it goes back to that analogy of, going to this exotic place and thinking you're going to have a great experience and things go in the total opposite direction. That prep work and the embodied act. So I think so many women that I speak to, they're like, "Oh, I want to have an unmedicated birth or a natural birth or this and that," but haven't really taken the time to think of like, how am I going to actually navigate this experience, which is the key.
And I think the key is, as you said, preparation is one of the keys. Support is another key. You can do all the prep in the world, and then if you're scared and you feel unsupported, that can have a big impact on your experience, right? Setting yourself up for success is important. Having people that you trust around you is important. And I've really seen how people want privacy in their birthing experience often. So maybe that means perhaps a long time ago we would have asked our mom, our cousin, our sister, our friend to come. And maybe now, if we want that privacy, it means we also maybe don't have that trusted companion with us in the experience. And that's where the doula role can really come in and provide that. But we know that doula, right? We should probably explain, but doula is support only. It's not a medical role, right? So anyone could act in that doula role who has experience, right? I'm not saying go be a doula if you haven't studied doula work, but we know that the role traditionally means servant and would have been provided by a mom, a sister, a cousin. I think that connection and that piece is really crucial to someone's experience. Even if they've prepped and prepped and prepped, it's an element for sure to consider if someone has a really strong desire to go to this exotic place and have it be feeling like, yeah, I feel comfortable here. right? It's that connection piece.
I think so too. Just making sure that the people around you are people you feel comfortable with, that you trust, who are collaborating with you if you do need to make a choice about something, and that you are given that privacy if you desire it. It's so funny. Like, you have probably seen much more than I have, but it's so funny how some people don't really desire any privacy and are fine, you know? And some people really, like myself, like if I was alone, I was happy during
Mm.
my labor experiences, and like maybe one person, like max, you know?
Yeah.
And so everyone is different, and I think it just goes to show our different personalities, our different desires, and so getting to know yourself ahead of time and what those desires are going to help you make the requests that you might not even know that you want to make. And so you can request that no residents are in that room with you. You can request for a staff member change. You can request all these things, but having someone to let you know that you can request it, and knowing the type of person that you are when you get into that space that you're talking about where you're not quite asleep, you're still awake in that space, like what comes out for you. And I think that's where the embodiment part really comes into play. So tell me about the thread, that curiosity that led to exploring embodiment and exploring sacred sexuality and tantra and intimacy and all of that stuff.
So that's been the newer chapter in my life, which is really exciting. Probably about 6 or 7 years of really diving into those elements. And part of it came actually from, you know, we won't talk about it too long because nobody wants to, but the pandemic. Nurses in the pandemic, we worked hard, right? We worked hard. Also had family and things going on and children and all of that. And I experienced burnout. So this was an experience for me. It's a cartoon dog, and they're drinking their coffee, and the whole house is on fire. And the meme says, "This is fine." Have you seen that one?
No, but it's funny.
It's funny. So people kept sending it to me because I was in this place where there was a lot going on. I had a lot on my plate to deal with, and I started to experience this burnout where I wasn't feeling a whole heck of a lot, actually. It was like, you can throw another emergency at me. This is fine.
Mm.
But when that happens and you get that shut down, you're also not experiencing the good stuff. So the pandemic kind of kicked me into this burnout stage of my life, which has been honestly my greatest teacher. And coming out of that, I had to reconnect with my curiosity. I was in a state of nothing can surprise me. I know what my day looks like. I've got my checklist of things I need to do. What are you looking forward to? My morning coffee. That's kind of the place I got to. And Tantra really was a practice that sparked my curiosity. And it was related to kind of yoga stuff and embodiment. And I liked it because I couldn't figure out what it was. I kept hearing about it, and people would talk about it, and I'd do some reading and be like, I still don't know what Tantra is. I actually cannot put my finger on what this is. And that sparked my curiosity because I think of myself as a pretty intelligent person, and usually I can figure something out, and I couldn't figure it out. Since then, I've come to know that Tantra it means to weave everything together. So I think of it kind of like a tree trunk, and the branches of the tree are things like breath work, mindfulness, meditation, movement, sound, sacred sexuality is one of the branches, right? I basically booked a Tantra session with someone who practices Tantra and just showed up and was like, I have no idea what this is, but I'm here.
I'm trying to figure it out, but please.
And you know what? The funny thing is, I'm probably 7 years into exploring Tantra, and I would still say, like, I don't know. I don't know, but it really lights me up. And when I'm around people practicing Tantra and when I'm practicing these breathwork, mindfulness, movement, sacred sexuality practices, I learn something new every time. So I will just continue to say I'm a student of Tantra and I'm figuring it out as I go.
I love that it sparked that curiosity and that joy, and you just kind of followed it. And you're like, you know what? Every time I think about this thing, I get lit up. And so let's just move in that direction. So something was guiding you towards that. And it sounds like I'm sure you did many things to heal or move out of burnout, but it really sounds like that was one of the driving forces.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I think it took something that was a little bit like taboo, and people are like, oh, Tantra is all about sex. I mean, sex and birth are so related. It makes a lot of sense to me to move into these realms kind of back and forth. I worked in a sexual health clinic for over 10 years. It's a topic that I've always been really interested in. I actually had forgotten. I was going through my university transcripts and I took an elective in human sexuality from York University in my first year undergrad nursing degree because it was an interest of mine. And I had just really forgotten that this has always been an interest. And I was at a workshop where they were talking about purpose. And the person leading the workshop said, what is it that people come to you for that you're just doing already without being paid for it, without making it your business? What is it that you already do? And I was already that person that people come to with their taboo questions, with their like, this is going on. What should I do here? Or Nicole, I had this weird thing happen to me, right? And I do think it's such a privilege as a nurse, as a birth worker. We're with people in those moments in their lives. There's a comfort level. So it just seemed like a pretty natural transition to move into this space that incorporates all my likes and interests and passions and really was able to connect with on an intellectual level, but really, as I've been talking about, that body-based level of experience.
Hmm. That's so lovely to hear. All parts of you have been kind of lit up and sparked this interest and this curiosity in you. You mentioned how related sex and birth are. And I think in our culture, in our society, in our conditioning, we really separate the two. And like it's almost like taboo to connect them in a way, even though it's all of the same organs, it's a lot of the same hormones, it's so related. And I think for if we think about it as something that is related, your sexual experiences must be something that you, if they're negative or if there was something traumatic that happened, it needs to be addressed in a way so that you can open up and expand and have the birth experience that you may desire. Because when it comes to the body, and going back to Gabor Mate's work, When the Body Says No, and the other book, The Body Keeps the Score, things will come up in the birth experience. And it's that body part, it's our sacral region, it's our root chakra, it's the pelvic bowl, right? Where we hold so many things as women. And so I think it's important to kind of just illuminate this shadow part of the birth experience that we don't often speak about. And so I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
I'm really glad you asked. And I think that we know statistically that birthing people have experienced so much trauma across the board. When we think about going into this really vulnerable space, right? where there may be a lot of fear, there may be a lot of lack of control, a lot of unknown, and things may come up that we're not even expecting. Having those conversations with care providers beforehand, having that awareness that this might come up for me in this experience. And then having those brave conversations can be really hard when a lot of time we know with trauma, we want to kind of, oh, if I just put it away, maybe I don't have to look at it and maybe it won't come up, right? Because those conversations are really, really scary. And I think it's important for people to know that those are precisely the conversations that we are familiar with having, that we are comfortable having. And hopefully, care providers are bringing it up. I know that prenatal screening includes questions around trauma, and that can be one of those deciding factors for people sometimes around care providers that they're choosing is maybe how supported they feel in that conversation, how supported they feel asking for what they might need, right? And as a care provider, having trauma-informed care providers, I think it's not optional, right?
Mm.
It's not optional to ask someone before you touch their body. It's not optional to explain to someone why you're going to do what you're going to do and asking permission, right? It's not optional to tell people we could do it like this or we could do it like that. What would you prefer? Right?
Mm.
When we have time, we want to give time. Do you need some time to think about that? And it's it's a communication, right, between the person and the care provider. And these are all basic expectations of trauma-informed. Those are just some examples. The birth process can profoundly bring up the experiences from the past, and it can make things harder, and I've seen it heal things as well and heal trauma as well. I've seen beautiful experiences where someone had a very difficult time and maybe very difficult birth, and then they have a birth that goes differently and really is a lot of healing. And there are people that can help with that, right? So knowing who in your community is trauma informed, who are your therapists, who are your coaches, your midwives, your nurses and obstetricians that are supportive. Does that answer your question? I'm not sure if you want to take it in a different direction, but as a topic, people should know that it's so common. Bringing up the topic and saying, hey, I'm worried because, or this has happened to me before and I can't get it off my mind, or what would happen if this came up, right?
Mhm.
Those are perfect, acceptable, and encouraged questions for people to ask of their care providers.
I think it's just having the awareness and the comfort level that you can ask these questions, and also having the awareness that something might have happened in the past, because some people suppress those memories, right? And it might come up in the birth experience, being aware that something has happened in the past. And even though it might be the last thing you want to do, actually during your pregnancy is the most transformative time to address those things, because you're in this kind of transformative portal of our lives already. And so massive amounts of healing and transformation can occur during your pregnancy. And I love that you said that you've seen healing happen during the birth experience, because we so often think of it as it can be potentially destructive to your body, right? But no, it can be healing on a physical level, on a mental, emotional, spiritual, energetic level as well.
Yeah. It's again, you're booking the trip to the exotic location, but You don't know until you're there, right? You don't know until you're there. And I think knowing in your community, who are those supportive people that if this was a wonderful trip, amazing. And if this challenged me beyond belief, okay, who are my people? And that's something that I really to do is connect and connect people, get people talking, connect them to their community, let people know that like you are not the only one experiencing this. It's so, so common. And that's often the piece that we're missing, right? Is those connections in that community, especially when we go into this really like sometimes solo experience. And then we're at home with a newborn on our own, expected to process all of this and take care of a baby and know what to do. That community piece is just vital.
So vital. I think it's mentioned on almost every single podcast that I record because it's like the lifeline, and it can make your experience very pleasant if you're supported and you have community around you and you're taken care of. Like the mother also needs to be mothered, or it can be what leads people down a path of postpartum depression, and all of those things is so vital, like you said. When we were talking about the healing, I think you mentioned at the beginning, addressing fears. So like a fear release type of ceremony or something like that. I'd love for you to, if you've done it, to elaborate on it and just let people know that that's an option during this phase of their life.
I think identifying some of those fears can come out differently for different people. Not everyone is comfortable in a group expressing what they're afraid of, right? And I think we're talking about birthing people, and we need to include partners and support people too, right? I really like to broaden that focus because if we're going to look at this experience and this birth of a new family, let's look at all the pieces. Our partners need to support as well. So it can be a nice connecting experience too, to do in a partnership, or to do in more of a class setting, or to do individually, right? Or with a coach or a therapist. So I think first, just knowing yourself enough to go, okay, where am I comfortable discussing, expressing my fears? And where would I want to do that? And who would I want to do that with? Because fears can look like fears, and fears can also look like a lot of trauma. That's going to be two very different experiences. So I wouldn't want to bring someone into some fear exercise in a group setting if that's not appropriate, right, for them. But let's say we've got someone with, I've heard this and I've heard that, and I have this kind of thought that's spinning in my head. We definitely want to go into, okay, tell me about it. When we bring light to those scarier pieces and we can express them, sometimes just that in itself can be helpful and healing. For some people, we need to bring in information that can be helpful and healing. And then for some people, we want to really also then take it to that next level and go into the body. What does it feel like to be scared? What does that fear feel like in your body? Can we stay there for a minute? And some people can, and some people are like, okay, Nicole, I don't know what you're talking about. That's okay too, but let's explore what that might feel like in your body. And how do we soothe that part? And again, that can look different for different people. But often just by feeling it and tuning into it and breathing into it, right? We can start to, it's like if it's really dense, if it's this really dense, scary, dark energy, and then we start to bring breath and light and spaciousness into it, it can sort of kind of be like, oh, all right, that feels different. I can move through that. And releasing those kinds of things are somatic practices that we can get into in kind of coaching or things like that. Or people can also choose to write things down and release them. People can choose what feels like symbolic to you if that is a connection that you can make. What I like to do is take a lot of these practices and really individualize them for people because everyone's at different levels of knowledge and embodiment practice and in their body, right? So, how can we make this work for you and really just illuminate some of the pieces that we can soothe, maybe would be a word, so that we can go into that birth experience going, okay, yeah, I felt this before. Here it is again. And here's what I know about it, and here's what I did, and I'm going to continue that rather than let it overwhelm, right? So I'm not sure if that's enough detail or just the right amount, but yeah, I think looking at fears can be such a healing process and they pop up, right? They pop up before, they pop up during, they pop up after. So they pop up in parenting, right? It's not like we have the baby and then, oh, everything's easy now. It's like, no, now I'm afraid they're not eating enough. Now I'm afraid they're not like, I'm looking at their number of wet diapers and they're supposed to have five and they've had four. Do you know what I mean?
Yep.
Every stage. Now I have a toddler and they're supposed to be, this is supposed to be happening, but it's not.
Mm.
So all of these pieces they carry through. So if we can build some skills in pregnancy, we're going to use them for the rest of parenting.
Absolutely. This is one of the reasons that I'm doing this is so that during the birth experience, like throughout the pregnancy, the birth experience, early postpartum, you're gaining these skills that are going to serve you for the challenges that are to come in motherhood and in parenthood and in your relationship as co-parents. Let's talk a little bit about that. I know we're almost coming to time, but I would love to talk about how to continue that connection with your partner if you are partnered. And my mind is definitely going to your knowledge in Tantra and sacred sexuality and mindfulness and embodiment and all of that stuff.
Ooh, I feel like we could do another hour on that
I know.
topic.
And
Yeah,
maybe we could, but briefly.
briefly. Yeah. I think if I'm going to just give like a nugget, it would be taking some of the pressure off, right? Taking some of the pressure off of looking at this as sexuality. It should look a certain way. It should feel a certain way. It should be every so often, or we have all of these ideas of what it should be. I think taking a lot of the pressure off and going, we're learning again. We are students again of this new body, of this new dynamic in our partnership. And what worked before may come back just the way it was, or we may need to be students together. And can we do that together? Can we just learn about what it feels like to be in this new body that maybe feels touched out and maybe feels exhausted and maybe feels overwhelmed and bring back sensuality without expectation. I think a lot of people that I talk to shut down their sexuality due to those kind of overwhelm and exhaustion pieces. And it's like, oh, I don't even want my partner to like initiate touching me, kissing me, holding me, putting their hand on my waist because it might lead to sex and I'm so tired. So can we have those conversations where we go like, I would like this right now and I don't want it to go anywhere. So we're not shutting down that sensual piece. And looking at Emily Nagoski's work around accelerators and brakes, right? She talks about we all have sexual accelerators and brakes. And becoming students of that together with your partner can be really interesting. I remember the best foreplay for me was like clean counters when I was with young children. I was like, nothing is happening if there are dishes in the sink and the counters have stuff on them. Do you want to talk about sexual accelerator? clean counters. And it sounds ridiculous. No word of a lie. That was like exquisite, exquisite. So laugh about it, but have those conversations and just take the pressure off. Take the pressure off and go back to some of those exploratory, playful pieces without all of the it should be this or it should be that or it has to go here or there.
I love that, maintaining that connection and that open communication. And I like the analogy of the accelerator and the brakes. And I agree, like because motherhood, having a newborn or a toddler, just like it's like a tornado going through your house all the time. Having some support that decreases some of the anxiety and the visual to-dos can allow your nervous system to just go into that more of a playful, curious state. And then you're going to be more playful and curious in other ways as well. So I love that analogy. Thank you for that. Nicole, before we head off, so I have one last question, but before we do that, you mentioned that you had a wide range of birth experiences with your children. And if you could, I know we don't have a lot of time, but briefly kind of describe those experiences and describe how it influenced the postpartum period and your motherhood journey. I know it's a big, big question, but please.
Okay, all right. Yeah, I always like to say what someone desires for their experience is going to be so, so different based on their past experience, their comfort levels. So there's that piece where I just want to preface with saying what's good for me is not necessarily good for anyone else, right? And I came at this with a lot of knowledge in a lot of different realms. So I did feel quite confident in asking for what I desired in my experiences. And I do think that is a really lucky place to be for me and that I had worked in the system kind of as I was in that having my own babies. So my daughters are 13 and 16 now. So I did have that what I would call more kind of routine or typical first birth experience. I had planned one thing and then I ended up with another. All the interventions happened, that cascade of labor is stalled and now the oxytocin and the epidural and the that cascade that sometimes happens and kind of felt like I went along for the ride a little bit, right? I had just myself and my partner. I'd asked my partner to be my support in a exotic trip that they'd never been on. Right? So that was baby number one. And then as I got more comfortable and familiar and learned more, I made different choices with baby number two, and the stars aligned. And I got to have a beautiful home water birth with a team that I had chosen. And by that point, my friends are doulas. So I had a couple of my friends there. My 3-year-old was there. Yeah, she did not care at all. She was like, "You're gonna let me watch a whole movie?" So she was watching The Lion King, and then we had this beautiful water birth, and I said, "This is your sister." And she said, "Yeah, can I go watch The Lion King now?" So that was hilarious.
I love that.
Sometimes we're like, oh, you know, so taboo to have a toddler at a birth, and she cared not.
I
So
love the
yeah,
normalizing of the
yeah,
birth experience. She's like, yeah, that's cool.
whatever.
Yeah.
I had two very, very different experiences. The second one felt supported and felt very healing. Again, some of it is prep and choices, and some of it is alignment of things that are out of my control. Feeling very, very lucky about that. And I wouldn't change it. I wouldn't even change the first experience, which was hard and not what I expected or wanted, because I love the perspective it gives me, right? The empathy I have for people who have gone through something that didn't go the way that they had hoped. And I've come to a place where I'm grateful. I'm grateful for the perspectives and kind of having the different experiences and what that's brought to my teaching, my connection with other people. So, kind of no matter how it goes, I hope that when people feel supported and can make sense of it and heal the parts that were a struggle, I think we just really become more human and more able to connect and more integrated in our community and more of those people who someone might come to and say like, "Hey, I'm really struggling with this," which feels like a really privileged position to be in.
Yeah, I love that it kind of set you up for also, your career path, but also motherhood. Like you sometimes things don't go the way that you expected, even though you think you're so prepared and like you were in that world. And I speak to so many women who are birth workers or in that world and things don't go the way that they expected, right? And so it's so humbling as a mother to experience that, as a human to experience that. And you're right, it makes you more able to connect to other people and the big lessons that come out of that and how you mother your children now, how you parent, those lessons transfer on. And then being able to have a very redemptive healing experience afterwards and knowing that like it wasn't that you're like just this magical being who can make whatever you want to happen. It's also a lot of things that are out of your control that you had to surrender to happen to align as well. So big lessons that came out of that. Thank you for sharing. Nicole, for my last question, which I like to ask all of my guests. I always talk about the birth imprint. So I call it the profound imprint because it's our entry point into this 3D reality as human beings. And it imprints something onto us, onto our nervous system. So the state that our mother was in, the state that the people in the room are in. And as we know, I'm not huge into astrology, but we are connected, right, to the planets and all of that stuff. There's an imprint that happens at that moment that we're born. And so things can either go as we expect in the imprint or as we desire, rather. And the imprint can be love and safety and trust, which are all signatures of oxytocin and bonding. Or sometimes they go a way that we don't really expect. And sometimes the imprint is a survival mode. Sometimes the imprint is mistrust. And sometimes the imprint is fear. And that's okay. It's not permanent. We can always do things to repair. But I think this podcast and the work that you're doing is just helping parents prepare for this exotic trip with more skills and more knowing and more embodiment. That imprint is hopefully love and safety and trust, because that shifts the world. It shifts how this human moves through the world and how they interact with other humans as they grow. With that being said, what would you like to imprint onto the ears of the listeners? It's a lot of new moms, a lot of parents preparing for the birth of their baby, and even people who are creative and want to birth something beautiful into this world. What would you like to imprint onto their ears?
Hmm, beautiful question. I would love for people to know that it's all welcome. The scary parts, the dark parts, the joyful parts, the embarrassing parts, the funny parts, it's all welcome. And if we can trust and connect and be humans together and laugh together and cry together, we create this ripple effect, right? So I love the idea that no matter how things go, and I always say this with my teaching as well and with my students, I really want to focus on those connections and just seeing each other and relating to each other as humans. And the rest is going to fall into place. The rest of the pieces are going to be what they're going to be. So that great letting go, letting
Mm.
go of expectations, letting go of feeling like we need to drive and control and check the boxes. But how about we just connect and share all of those parts and kind of see what unfolds? Bring it back to the curiosity. Like, let's get curious together and just allow everything to be welcome. See how that.
Thank you, Nicole. I love that so much. Big, big lessons from birth is this big letting go. You are literally letting go of a human from your body. And the big lesson is
Yeah.
how can you let go? Thank you so much for that. Nicole, if people want to connect with you, if they want to work with you, if they're curious about your classes, how can they connect with you?
Yeah. So they can go to my website, which is just www.nicoledaniel.ca, and they can connect with me there. My email's there. You can book a call with me. A lot of the work I do now is in one-on-one, is in coaching, connecting people, kind of having these conversations and finding out what are your desires, what are you hoping for, and how can we move toward that. Yeah, drop me a intro call and people can chat with me about if I'm the right person to work with or if I can connect someone with the right people to work with. I'm happy to do that too.
That's beautiful. Thank you. I'm going to put that in the show notes so people can connect with you. I know you're not big on Instagram, but you do have a profile. And so as we release clips of this podcast, I will definitely add you. So if people are curious, they can connect with you that way as well. And I just can't wait for people to learn more from you. You are such a wealth of knowledge. And it's so funny that reluctantly you said yes to this podcast because you're like, I don't even know what I have to say. I'm like, woman, you have all the things to say. So thank you
Well,
again for coming on.
thank you for having me. That was really exciting to do my first podcast. So,
Yes, yes, yes.
yay.
Celebrations.
Yeah,
Bye, Nicole.
take it easy.